I'd like to introduce Professor Allan Kellehear. Now, the video we're going to play for Professor Kellehear was taken when at the launch of the Southwest Compassionate Communities Network in this, obviously the Southwest. And that was in 2018. And I always play it at the start of something like this because he really sets the scene so well into the importance of compassionate communities. And he's such an entertaining speaker anyway. And he's the one who founded, you know, what we call the new public health movement in palliative care, or health promoting palliative care, or public health approach to palliative care, or now it's called the compassionate communities movement. So he has a big imprint on the field, and I'm really delighted to share with you this. Can I just say there is a panel discussion at the end. So if people would like to text their questions on the mobile number there, or they want to use the chat box.
Samar and Holly have asked me to speak about the importance of compassionate communities, and you're starting a compassionate community in your area in Western Australia there. And so I'll talk a little bit about why this is important. There are really basically three major reasons why you need to do this. And the first one is what I call the 95% rule. Less than 5% of the time that a dying person spends, or a grieving person spends, is spent in front of a doctor or a nurse. 95% of the time a dying person spends, they spend alone, or with family, or with friends, or their animal companion, or with their TV, or with the internet. That's where the bulk of time is spent by dying people. And it doesn't matter if they're inside a hospital or in their own homes. 95% of the time they spend with that group of people I've just mentioned. If you look at the international studies, it's about 8% of the time patients spend in front of a nurse, and about 4% of the time they spend in front of a doctor. So to turn that on its head, 95% of the time, they'll spend that time either alone or with people like you and me. That's a fact. If you care about end-of-life care, you've got to ask yourself, what are we doing in that 95%? And the answer from professional services is not very much. Not very much at all. And the only way we're going to make an impact on that is two ways. Either we put a hospice and palliative care service on every street corner, or we get the community involved to take up their responsibilities in that 95%. And I don't think we're going to get a hospice or a palliative care service on every street corner. You may remember back in the 70s and 80s, the neighbourhood watch movement. You remember the neighbourhood watch movement? The neighbourhood watch movement was created because people were worried about spreading crime. And there were calls for more police officers. There were actually people who wanted a police station on every street corner. And the cops knew that was never going to happen. That was never going to happen. It was better if communities took some responsibility for safety and for crime prevention. And that meant culture change. That meant getting people who were used to minding their own business, not looking out at their neighbour's house or their gardens or their windows, just minding your own business, getting that set of cultural values turned around so as that neighbours were actually encouraged to look into their neighbours' gardens on a regular basis. They even see through their neighbours' windows to make sure that the people wandering around in there were actually their neighbours. And if the people who were trying to crawl into their neighbour's back window weren't their neighbours, maybe it was a good idea if somebody called the cops, and that was called Neighbourhood Watch. We're trying to do the same thing in end-of-life care. The frail elderly, the people dying of life-limiting illnesses, the people grieving, the people with long-term care responsibilities. They're not on their own. They're part of us. We have a responsibility to do our bit for them. And that's what the 95% rule is about. And that's one important reason why we have compassionate communities growing up all over the world. The second reason is it's not the dying which is the problem. We all die. And it's not the grieving that's the problem, because we will all grieve. The problem is what public health people call comorbidities. It's what comes along with dying that's the problem. It's what accompanies grieving that's the problem. It's the anxiety. It's the depression. It's the loneliness. It's the social isolation. It's the stigma. It's the social rejection. It's the lost school days, the lost work days. And it gets worse. It's the suicides, and it's the sudden deaths. These are the problems with dying and grieving and caregiving. And funnily enough, if you compare the studies of people with serious bereavement with people living with life-limiting illnesses, whether that's cancer or whether it's AIDS or motor neuron disease, the comorbidities are very similar. And all of those things are amenable to prevention, or if we can't prevent them, harm reduction. And in any case, we can act early rather than late. Early intervention. Our watchwords in compassionate communities all over the world is what we can do, what can we do around prevention and harm reduction of these things which commonly accompany dying and grieving and long-term caregiving. What can we do about the depression? We don't want to send people in for medication or counselling. Most people don't need medication or counselling. They need support. They need support. They need friends, or they need better friends. They need co-workers, or they need better co-workers. They need their fellow students and teachers, or more informed students and teachers. They need us. They need a compassionate community. This is not some vague word about feeling kind. This is a practical set of strategies that come from us. They come from our neighbourhood. They come from our schools. They come from our workplaces and trade unions. They come from our churches and our temples. They're everywhere where we are. And when you're living with a life-limiting illness or grieving, they're everywhere where you are. In healthcare today, in every speciality, they have this public health component. There are community initiatives everywhere. End-of-life care is the newest kid on the block, and it's come late to these insights. But if you go to a cardiologist, no cardiologist believes that seeing him or her as a cardiologist is the last word on heart health. In fact, cardiologists don't think they're about heart health at all. You only see a specialist cardiologist when you have a heart attack or when you have a heart problem. What you're supposed to do is look after yourself. You're supposed to eat right. You're supposed to exercise. You're supposed to take care of yourself, avoid stress, And then when something goes mildly wrong, you see a GP. And when something goes seriously wrong, then you might need to see a consultant, a specialist. And that's when you beat a path to the cardiologist's door. Nobody in trauma medicine thinks that they're about accident and emergency. Nobody in casualty thinks that. You go to casualty when things go wrong. When you ride a bicycle, you should be riding a bicycle with a helmet. And you know why? When you go to the supermarket, you look around at the breakfast cereal. You don't choose the breakfast cereal with 100% sugar. You know not to do that. You pick the healthy one. You pick the one with 80% sugar. You're supposed to wear your bicycle helmet. You know you're supposed to wear your seatbelt. You know you're supposed to wear a condom. Some of you like to wear all three at once. Each to their own. The question you've got to ask yourself is, what are the end-of-life care equivalents? They are in our neighbourhoods. They are in our schools. It is insufficient. It's a 1950s fantasy to think that end-of-life care is just about the local hospice or the local end-of-life care palliative care service or the bereavement counsellor. The bereavement counsellor is not our first line of support. Our friends are our first line of support. Our family, our dog. We need to learn to use that more systematically. We need to be systematically involved. We need policies to help shape these things. We need to be engaged. We need to become not just healthy communities. We need to become compassionate communities.